Welcome to the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the second quarter of 2022. Welcome to Lesson 3 in the series on Genesis. It's titled Cain and His Legacy, ready for teaching on April 16, and my name's Percy Harrold. Friday, April 15. The repeated phrase, Enoch walked with God, in Genesis 5:22 and 24, means intimate and daily companionship with God. Enoch's personal relationship with God was so special that God took him, it says in Genesis 5:24. This last phrase is, however, unique in the genealogy of Adam and does not support the idea of an immediate afterlife in paradise for those who walk with God. Note that Noah also walked with God in Genesis 6 verse 9, and he died like all the other humans, including Adam and Methuselah. It also is interesting to note that no reason is given to justify this special grace. As we read in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 86, Enoch became a preacher of righteousness, making known to the people what God had revealed to him. Those who feared the Lord sought out this holy man to share his instruction and his prayers. He laboured publicly also, bearing God's messages to all who would hear the words of warning. His labours were not restricted to the Sethites. In the land where Cain had sought to flee from the divine presence, the prophet of God made known the wonderful scenes that had passed before his vision. Behold, he declared, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment upon all and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds. Jude 14 and 15. End of quote. And that brings us to our two discussion questions for this week. 1. Why did Cain kill his brother? Read the following comment by Eli Wiesel. Why did he do it? Perhaps he wanted to remain alone, an only child, and after his parents' death the only man. Alone like God, and perhaps alone in place of God. Cain killed to become God. Any man who takes himself for God ends up assassinating men. And that's from Messengers of God, Biblical Portraits and Legends, published in 1976 and page 58. How can we be careful, even if we don't commit murder, not to reflect the attitude of Cain? And question 2. Compare the lifespan of the antediluvians in Genesis 5 to that of the patriarchs. How would we explain this decreasing of the span of human life? How does this degeneration counter the premises of modern Darwinism? Well, let's have a look at Genesis chapter 5. In verse 5 we read, So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And then verse 8, So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And verse 11, So all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. And verse 14, So all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And verse 17, So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And verse 20, So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And verse 23, So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And verse 27, So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And verse 31, So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And verse 32, And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Inside Story. Forgiven in Prison, Part 2, by Andrew McChesney. The next Sabbath, inmate Matthias greeted Dante, a 36-year-old theology student from Sagunto Adventist College, with a flurry of happy conversation at the prison in Spain. After several minutes, however, Matthias abruptly changed his tone and began to fidget nervously. He spoke about his childhood and adult life. He described years-long struggle over sinful desires. "I don't feel like I've done anything wrong," he said. "When I leave prison, I'll repeat what I did." He stared at Dante, waiting to see his reaction. Dante understood that he was being tested. Matthias wanted to see whether he would reflect a condemning or a loving God. Dante prayed silently, "Jesus, give me your grace. You forgave me, and you can forgive him." Matthias, seeing that his visitor sat calmly, spoke again. "What would you do to me if you caught me?" he asked. Dante, still praying, answered slowly, "If God can give me grace and salvation, he can give you grace and salvation too." Shock twisted Matthias's face. "Aren't you going to condemn me?" he asked. Opening the Bible, Dante read, "For the good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, that I practice. Now if I do what I will not to do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me." Romans 7:19 and 20. "We often don't understand our actions," he said. "We don't do what we want to do, and we end up doing what we don't want to do. Could it be that you don't feel bad about your actions because you can't control them?" Matthias grabbed the Bible from Dante's hand and read the passage. Dante turned to Romans 8, verses 1 and 2 and read, "There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death." God hasn't condemned you, Dante said. He wants to help you, and he loves you all the time. You can live differently. You just have to let the Spirit of God dwell in you. He wants to help you just like he helped me. Deep sorrow filled Matthias's face. The scorn and contempt were gone. Dante understood that, for the first time, Matthias was experiencing a deep sense of guilt. Everything changed from that day. Matthias stopped mocking God and the Bible. "From that moment I started to study the Bible with him," Dante said in an interview. From that moment he wanted to change his life. He no longer wanted to continue in his old ways, but to be on God's side. Matthias, not his real name, is among more than a dozen prisoners receiving Bible studies every Sabbath afternoon from Dante and 9 other students from Segundo Adventist College. Your Sabbath School mission offerings help Adventist educational institutions worldwide train students like Dante to share Jesus' precious promise of grace and salvation to a sin-sick world. If God can change my heart, God can change anybody's heart, Dante said. This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.